Great, well, thank you very much, and thanks a lot. Well, I represent a company which has manufacturing in the UK. The first Toyota plant built in Europe was built in Derby, and we have our engine plant in Deeside. But today, I'm going to give you a little bit of an insight and probably some thought provokers about how you might go the distance, how you might achieve these challenges. Some will be open for debate, others will see what happens. But first of all, I'd like just to ask to give you a thought. A thought here, if you look around the room here, I don't think anyone in this room has the same pair of shoes, the same size, the same type even. Because you don't have one size fitting all. Nobody is a medium. You've got to have a range of different options, and these options have to change over time. And as a manufacturer, for example, you will have to respond to those changes, and you have to plan for those changes to satisfy them. So it's not about one solution to transport, for example, it's a range of many that we have to consider. This chart up here, don't worry too much about the detail on here, except for thinking about the red line. This is the modes of transport that people take when they go about their business, whatever it might be. The red block is car transport. 58% of people travel by car when they go somewhere, except for when they walk, which is not surprising. But the key takeout is there. That little small bit to your right-hand side is what public transport does. That is all that public transport does. So shifting, modal shifts, getting people out of vehicles is going to be extremely difficult, and it differs in different circumstances. So this particular chart here shows people going to work. So around about 58%, I think, or 60-odd percent up here, I can't quite see, yes, 68% of people travel to work by car, right? But it's different around the country and around the world, because as you can see, in most places in the UK, it's 70% or more. 80% of people travel to work by car in Wales. Only 27% in London. Not surprising, better transport infrastructure. But don't just focus then on the solutions that are applied in London, the people who are experiencing that, and say, hey, I can do it, why can't you? As an automotive manufacturer, in fact, as a product manufacturer of any sort, but particularly I'm thinking about automotive here, you've got to think about the products that you supply. As a global manufacturer that makes 10 million vehicles a year, that satisfy the needs across many, many countries in many circumstances, you've got to think how those applications can be applied, and applied efficiently and properly, in consideration of sustainability of production, but also the energy that goes into them. The other challenge is to ensure that whether you're a private individual or a business, you have to have a product that actually you can afford, that actually can do the job that you need, that also integrates with what else is there. These are the considerations that need to be thought through when an automotive manufacturer is thinking of the products that they're going to deliver. But in the production processes and through the life of the vehicles and even at disposal, there are considerations about the energy that's consumed and the resources that are consumed. All very, very important, and things that businesses will be thinking about and government and policymakers should also understand are influencing their decisions. But when we think about what we're going to do in terms of emissions, it's pretty clear a zero-emission tailpipe car can be an electric car. And actually moving to electric, and electric in transport of any sort, requires certain components. And the three components you need is a motor, you need some sort of energy storage, a battery, and you need a power converter, an inverter in this case. So in any of these technologies, you will need the supply chain to supply these products. And then you will apply them in the way that's most appropriate. In the case of a hybrid electric vehicle, a full hybrid electric vehicle, which generates its own electricity on board, you've got a product which will reduce emissions against a comparable engine by around about 30% or more. If you have a plug-in hybrid vehicle, you could run it always by plugging it in if the distance is sufficient, but it'll be probably a bit of a mix. In battery electric vehicles or fuel cell electric vehicles, you have full zero emission use. But the big difference in these products is the size, the weight, the cost, and the chemistry of the battery that you put into those vehicles. And that's really important when you think about the future. But what can you do in the transition? So Toyota has sold around 18 million hybrid vehicles, saving more than 30% in terms of emissions per vehicles against a comparable petrol car, means that the equivalent of 6 million zero-emission vehicles, if you like, are represented by those 18 million cars. So, you know, that is the total amount of EVs, more or less, that was sold in the world last year. That's the impact they have. And if you take Europe, we sold over 600,000 hybrids across the group last year. That's equivalent to around taking 200,000 vehicles off the road in Europe, which is the same as the best-selling electric vehicle managed to achieve in Europe as well. But it's not just about the products themselves, it's things like the energy. And this is a little analogy. You know, this is what I'm led to believe is the largest tomato plant in the world. So you have your production, you produce a lot of fruit, you can maximize your production by doing it on a scale, and you consume what you produce, don't you? And you consume it when it's there. But what happens when you can't consume it? It goes to waste. What do you do with it? Well, you can store it. You can store it and you can reuse it. And you can reuse it in different ways as well. That's marvelous because that allows you resilience and efficiency in your production methods and how you can use it. And that translates actually into hydrogen, because hydrogen can be produced pretty much anywhere using the renewables that you have available to you, stored indefinitely, can be consumed on site, or it can be distributed without losing any of its energy content. And this is an enabler. This is an enabler to decarbonising transport, decarbonising industry, decarbonising heat and power as a feedstock. It can provide the energy to charge your electric car. The other thing to not be misled by or confused by is about efficiency. Electrical efficiency, transferring energy, has a certain calculation. But when you talk about vehicle efficiency, a key parameter is weight. The Mirai, our hydrogen fuel cell car, will drive about 400 miles, and the system that allows it to do it weighs under 200 kilos. For a battery, in a battery electric vehicle, it would weigh around 500, 550 kilos or perhaps more. If I want to go twice the distance in my car, actually, I only need more fuel and more storage. It puts on a little more weight. It would weigh under 300 kilos. A battery to do the same job will weigh over a ton and use a lot of materials to do it. I also have to think about the infrastructure that I have in terms of supporting that. So if I am building my electric vehicles, I have a grid that's basically been paid for, it's been invested in, it's been subsidized, and actually putting quite a number of electric vehicles on the road is not going to have a huge impact in terms of needing to reinforce or grow that grid. But this study here for Germany has identified that, you know, once you get to a large mass of vehicles, you have to start to invest at quite high scale in terms of the electric network and the supply. So around about 10 million vehicles in Germany, it starts to get parity between hydrogen. Now, hydrogen is expensive to produce at low scale and distribute and store, but once you've done it, you can do an awful lot with it. So by the time you get to about 40 million vehicles on the road, or 20 million vehicles on the road, sorry, which is about 2/3 of the vehicles in the UK, then it's 25% more expensive to run with electricity. And the raw materials themselves, a very important fact. There's a finite amount of raw materials. You've got to reduce the damage of bringing them out of the ground. So what do you want to do with it? You want to spread them. So with the same amount of materials that I have to build one battery for one car, I could make 30 or more hybrid or fuel cell electric cars, which means I could have 30 zero-emission fuel cell vehicles for the equivalent of one battery electric vehicle to satisfy one customer and one need. And I can feed my fuel cell vehicle with hydrogen that's been stored and produced and is available on demand. If I want to use my renewable energy to charge my electric vehicle, I need the sun to be shining, or I need the wind to be blowing, or I need some sort of storage. Well, ideally, that storage can be in hydrogen. And when it comes to disposal, of course, there are extra components that go into a fuel cell car. However, those materials can all be recycled and put back into the process. Whereas for batteries, it's extremely difficult and is quite challenging. And on the raw material case, it's important to think about the ability to supply those raw materials. So this is just an example that was taken. So the raw materials that go into an average battery cost this time last year around about $1,400. They now cost over $7,000 to do the same thing. And when you look at where those materials are processed and produced and who owns them, it is actually not in the UK and predominantly is in China. And if we want to produce those batteries in those gigafactories in the UK, we're going to have to exponentially increase the amount of raw materials that we have to reach that capacity. And isn't it far better to use those raw materials across quite a number of products than just focus on one or two? So my message really is that we need to get government to be aligned, to collaborate and cooperate, to set a strategy that we can all pin on, as Rachel was discussing, things that we can invest in over time. And that will allow us to achieve our goals. But one final thing is that diversity is the mother of invention, because that allows us to develop and become better at what we do. So my also comment to this is that don't just seed a small amount of things, but really seed it properly to allow those things to develop and for us and our innovation to grow and develop. So thank you very much. Just about 10 minutes.